in East Africa that humans moved and migrated. Oh, all right. And populated all parts of the earth. Africa is massive. There are hundreds and thousands of cultures, language dialects, and religions. Africa is not a country. Africa happens to be a continent, of which there are 7. And so, in looking at Africa, we're going to start and kind of go counterclockwise around Africa and wind up back in Egypt. There is a lot of difficulty in studying a lot of Africa. For number 1, its sheer size. 2, the massive volume. And 3, a lot of things were orally passed down. A lot of the African civilizations did not develop the ability or the need to write simply because they didn't need to. All right. Everything was orally passed down. So a lot we have to look at artifacts. We have to try and piece things together. And then when the Islamic invaders came, followed by the Europeans, is when we really begin to get a good idea of what was going on. But it is from outside sources. It is non-African sources. So, first thing that has an impact on the people is the geography of Africa. Across the northern tier, you have the Great Sahara Desert, where will be the Trans-Sahara trade route. South of the Sahara Desert, you have the Great Savanna or Prairie Land that covers most of the continent. When thinking about the African countryside and what Savanna Prairie Land looks like, just think of where Simba ran around with Nala. All right, that's what or the view from the balcony at Casa de Chrysler in Tanzania, the Savannah grasslands. It's always a good view, I'm told. I looked at it on Google. Anyway, savannas are good for farming. There's a lot of good rivers and a lot of rainfall. Also, we have rainforests, dense jungle, and even snow-capped mountains here at Mount Kilimanjaro. So, desert, grasslands, thick, lush rainforest, and forest lands along with deserts. So every type of climate on the planet can be found on the continent of Africa. So these geographic barriers, or these geographic features, are also barriers to movement. It is very difficult in some areas to get inland from Africa. It doesn't have a lot of good ports or places where it's easier to dock a ship. So for hundreds or thousands of years, the African tribes just kind of lived on their own. But Africa has a lot of resources, from gold and salt to diamonds and emeralds. And then there are the exotic animals, giraffes, lions, zebras, silverback gorillas. Those are things that make Africa deeply attractive to outsiders. And much like people spread around the earth from Africa, well, people spread all over Africa. And one of the migrations that is often talked about is the Great Bantu Migration. The problem with that is that most people assume it is one movement. The people moved one time. That is completely not true. The Bantu migration was a series of migrations over 1,000 years. And what happened, people over here in Nigeria began to fan out across Africa. They go over to Kenya, and then they boomerang and they head south. So they go east, they go south, and they spread out, and they stop a little bit above South Africa. So like the torso part of Africa. And Bantu is not a group of people, it is a root language dialect, like Latin. And over a 1,000-year period, these West African farmers moved throughout Africa, spreading their base language. They also displaced many smaller, less skilled tribes people and brought their culture, ideas on how to farm and how to work metal. So the Bantu migration is significant because it is one of the 2 largest root languages in Africa. But it was many migrations over 1,000 years. So when you hear the Bantu migration, that is false. It is Bantu migrations, plural, over a long period of time. Today, about a third of the people, 33% of the people in Africa will speak a Bantu dialect. Anyway, trying to think of how to sum that up. That's pretty good, right? You guys got that? All right. Africa had the Egyptian civilization in the beginning. After that, there was a loose confederation of tribes until around the year 400. So right about the time that Rome is beginning to collapse and fall, we have the formation of powerful African kingdoms. The first of which comes here in the right shoulder socket of Africa, known as the Kingdom of Ghana. And Ghana will be the trendsetter of African kingdoms from this point onward. And it will last up until, around 800-900. It's going to have a good 400 or 500 years of dominance. And Ghana is powerful because it will control the eastern-west trade route across Africa that we know as the Trans-Sahara trade route. It also controlled trading on the Niger and the Senegal rivers. So everything that moved in and out of northern and West Africa went through Ghana. Key things that were traded: gold, copper, and salt. So, the king of Ghana was interesting for the fact that he, more than any other ruler, probably throughout time, had a lot of daily contact with his people. He was seen as a divine being, but not quite a god. He was the supreme ruler to bring justice. And so when there was a dispute, you went to the king and he gave his ruling. So the common people had a lot of access to their king. And they got to see him and interact with him more so than any other people. The other thing that makes the kings of Ghana different is that their rule was not passed down father to son. Once the king died, it went to his closest female relative's son. So it was matrilineal descended rather than being father to son in a dynasty. So, the people of Ghana were polytheistic, and they worshiped the African gods of nature, as will everyone else. And the Kingdom of Ghana will earn a lot of money by renting or leasing royal lands where cash crops would be grown, things like sugar cane and bananas that could be sold. And it's because of their trading and their exports that Ghana is able to spread their influence over much of West Africa. And much like the Qin and the Han dynasties of China, a good comparison here is that the kings of Ghana maintained a monopoly on necessary items, things that everybody needed. So you had to come to him and you had to buy them. So eventually, gold will no longer be traded in Ghana because salt and iron will replace it in importance. Ghana, much like Egypt and the Aztecs, had so much gold that they just didn't care. It was like laying on the ground. They'd be like, oh, there's another pile of gold. You know, like, oh, look at that. Get it out of the way. It's like granite or quartz here in North Carolina. Stuff is everywhere. And so, Ghana will also be the first African civilization other than North African Bedouins to come into contact with Islam. And while the people of Ghana do not convert early on, they make elaborate concessions. They go to extravagant lengths to accommodate the Islamic traders. They do this because the Muslims are bringing in more and more material and access to a greater trade network that will go through Africa to the Middle East all the way over to, say it with me, the Silk Road to China. So they got access to more material and to greater markets. We're going to trade items from the Atlantic all the way to the Pacific and vice versa. So Muslim traders were accommodated in every way possible. And since these Muslims are literate, this is now the 700s, they eventually helped advise the king and his government. And here's where writing will make its way into West Africa. Before this, everything was orally passed down. I'll simply just tell you how to do it. Well, now writing is going to come in the form of Arabic, further binding West Africa to the Middle East. And Ghana was able to stay powerful for a very long time because they had a large, very well-trained military force. But a group of Islamic nomads will bring superior weapons technology and tactics, and they will eventually defeat Ghana around the 900s. And while Ghana falls into a little bit of chaos, very shortly after that, the second West African kingdom grows. It is the Kingdom of Mali. Mali will rebuild itself virtually right on top of Ghana, and it will maintain its solid power base. And the Kingdom of Mali will completely monopolize the gold trade throughout Africa all the way to the Middle East. No gold came into or left Africa without the Malian government being in control or putting its stamp on it. So, the Malian government also, much like the Han Dynasty and Ghana, maintain a monopoly on gold and salt as well. So, one of the greatest leaders of the Kingdom of Mali was King Sundiata, and he will reign from 1232 to 1255. To put that in a European reference, that is right in the beginning of the Third Crusade. Yes, sir.
What was his reign again?
1235 to 1255. That is when Saladin and King Richard the Lionheart are duking it out up here in the Middle East. Sundiata is building the power of Mali in the African world. And as a result of Sundiata's hands-on policies, there is a massive food surplus for the Empire of Mali, which results in a population boom with babies. Yes. With this large population and a solid economy, Sundiata wants to expand his empire. He goes all the way over to the Atlantic coast. He goes over to what is today Algeria and then straight down. And he will control pretty much all of this, and it is he who will start to build the fabled city of Timbuktu, who will be virtually identical to ancient Rome, built on the Niger River on 7 hills, 4 on the north side, 3 on the south side, where ancient Rome is built on the Tiber River on 4 hills on the north side and 3 hills on the south side, forming a natural large acropolis, and they could see enemies from a long way away. Timbuktu becomes Mali's capital. And Timbuktu becomes this large, multicultural city with many different people, many different languages, and religious backgrounds. It is a cosmopolitan city. Today, it would be like Istanbul or New York City or like Hong Kong. All right, there are a lot of people coming in and out of there from all over the place. It is sometimes a little bit later on referred to as the Athens of Africa, because scholars from all over the place went there because it was cool. On my flux capacitor Doc Brown time machine, one of the ancient cities I would most like to visit would be Timbuktu right about this time, to see how cool it was. So anyway, the location of Timbuktu was key, as there are all these languages and religious backgrounds. Sundiata was a strong king, but he didn't aggressively centralize his power. He was not a thug. He was not this big bureaucracy like Rome or China. But Timbuktu contained and connected all of these smaller provinces. So, some of these provinces had a lot of independence as long as they paid taxes. They acknowledged Sundiata as their king, and they gave soldiers for his army. And Sundiata will take the name of Mansa. Mansa simply means supreme, sacred leader. So when they ask you next Thursday, who is your teacher, you respond by saying, Mansa Mulega, Supreme Sacred Leader Mulega. Clearly, that's how we do this. All right? And his twin brother, Mansa Musa, all right, who was my twin a while back. All right, you know, most people don't know that. The core of the Malian civilization is the Malinke people. And the Malinke people have many different clans. They were this confederation around West Africa. And it was governed by many of the most powerful noble families who ran a leadership role and governed city-states. Question, Lucy? All right. They lived in city-states very similar to those of ancient Greece, the Mayan city-states in Mexico, and even the civilizations of the great Zimbabwe. It's very similar. trying to think what else. The Malinkis, yes, they controlled the rich, lush land along the Niger River, and the Kingdom of Mali will be the first to go inland, capture other Africans, and bring them back and make them work on what we will think of as plantation slavery. Growing sugar cane, growing bananas, and other labor-intensive crops. And you were captured for the specific purpose to be a slave. Around 1100, many of the Malinke people are going to convert to Islam. This will give West Africa, who had kind of lived this little utopian, isolated happiness for centuries, greater contact with the outside world. And many kings will make a Hajj over to Mecca, including the most famous Hajj in world history, made by my twin brother, Mansa Musa, who, as he crosses Africa, will have that enormous P. Diddy entourage, and he will give away so much gold and wealth, being generous the way the tenets of Islam say you should be. He will devalue the currency of Egypt for a decade. And you see the Disney movie Aladdin, Prince Ali's procession into Agrabah is modeled after Mansa Musa. There's only one other problem that Mansa Musa is going to create unknowingly for his empire and continent. When he gives away so much gold, people in this continent all of a sudden look south and they say, hey, when'd that get there? Now we know there's always been trading, all right? The Greeks, the Romans, the Phoenicians, there's always been trading between Europe, Africa, and Asia. But during the Dark Ages, after the fall of Rome, nobody went to Africa. Now all of a sudden, shucks, Jimmy Joe, what's that, Richard Robert? However you would say that in Spanish. Looks like there's some land over there. And it happened to be a giant continent. Let's go down there and look. You got that right, Richard Robert, or Robert Richard, otherwise known as Ricky Bobby. Let's go down there and check it out, all right? It's one of my great American characters, as well as a Will Ferrell character. How are we doing? Mike's good? Mic check, mic check. Everybody in switch? I'll go Will Smith on it right up in here. All right. It's a good song. I like that song. Anybody know that song? Because know who Will Smith is? Yeah. Never heard Switch?
Will Smith is kind of free us. Give or take 8 years.
Wow.
I might know.
Man. First one in, last one out the club. First one in, last one out the club. When I was amateur spitting before the scripts was written.
Oh, yeah.
It's called Switch.
Yeah, okay.
Mic check, mic check. What? Oh, man. God, my shoulders must be broad. I got to carry all of you. All right, so.
Really strange lyrics to your song.
How are those strange lyrics?
If you look at any song's lyrics,
they're strange. Except How Do You Like Me Now?
Yeah.
All right.
Is that part of the song?
No, it's a different song entirely.
Okay. So people do references to biblical songs in their songs. Also, I'm doing a big because I know that's my excuse.
Do you want some sun chips?
Here. You know what I have? I have a piece of cornbread from the teacher chili lunch I didn't eat. Seriously, I know parents made it. I mean, I had...
Sure?
Is that the stuff Mother Chrysler made? You need that more than I do. I can live off my fat for at least a month. I'll be okay. All right, yeah, I'm all right. All right. You guys need a break or are you guys ready? Good. So, Kingdom of Mali will attract, Mansa Musa will attract the attention of the Europeans. Now, Mansa Musa was a devout Muslim, and when he returns, he brings back a lot of Islamic scholars, merchants, judges, and business people, and he helps turn Timbuktu into a massive cultural trading city. This is when it is known as the Athens of Africa. Mali will break apart after Mansa Musa. He is one of those great Jedi-like leaders who, when he is done, nobody else knows what to do, like a Pericles. So there is a civil war in Mali, and that brings it to its collapse. Following it will be the third and the last of the West African empires, known as the Kingdom of Songhai, S-O-N-G-H-A-I or H-A-Y. However you want to spell it, it's the same thing. It is correct in either version. Songhai picks up where Mali left off, and they are known for their famous king, Mr. Soni Ali. He is an imperial warrior who wants to carve out a massive kingdom in West Africa. And they do so, number one, because they take over all the trading and the agricultural lands of West Africa, but they also build a navy. And they are able to transport troops over the great West African rivers rather than do it over land. Their mobility is unprecedented. They can get everywhere very quickly. And Soni Ali, here's a cause and effect, will die in 1492, almost at the exact same time that Columbus discovers the West Indies. Soni Ali dies. Just for pure speculation, we don't know if it was natural causes, if he was actually killed during a hunting accident. But Soni Ali is dead. And the thing about Soni Ali is he was Muslim when the Muslim trading caravans were in Songhai. When they left, he went back to worshiping the traditional African gods. When he dies, his replacement, a guy named Askia Muhammad Al-Tari, was a passionate, intense Muslim. And he builds his government on a model of Islam and recruited scholars and ministers to help him create his Islamic empire. Problem is, he does it at the expense of many of his own people. He kicks them out, rubs them out, and replaces them with Muslims. So, this is going well, but it comes at a high cost to the African continent because here comes the Portuguese. And the effects of Mansa Musa, Soni Ali, and Muhammad Al-Tari are, while Europe was caught in its dark ages, Africa was getting along just perfectly fine. But the Hajas of Mansa Musa and Muhammad Al-Tari bring unwanted attention. So much gold is given away that this kickstarts the period of European expansion. Prince Henry the Navigator in Portugal is going to design those navigational techniques just to see if he can get farther and farther into Africa. And Europeans come to Africa for gold, but what will eventually happen is the slave trade is going to begin, and that brings Europeans back to Africa for centuries, and is the slave trade that will define the next period of African history. It is at this point that Roberto comes in, and Africa will be reattached to the global economy. Europeans will take riches from Africa, gold and salt and ivory and pepper, and they will name the location of where they get them from. So this country today is known as the Ivory Coast because we pulled off ivory from there. Ghana used to be known as the Gold Coast and the Salt Coast and the Pepper Coast. It's where you went to get that product. And West Africans are more than willing to help out early on. The Portuguese will be the first to reconnect Africa. Yes, sir. Alex, what in the hell were you doing for like 45 minutes?
I don't know.
All right.
Thank you.
All right. So, Portuguese are going to introduce new crops to Africa from the Americas, like corn, potatoes, and beans, all of which grow well in the climate of West Africa and are high in protein, so the population explodes. And a new territory is coined. It is known as Senegambia. Did I put that up here? Yes. Senegambia will be in the widest part of West Africa, the shoulder socket, where the Senegal and the Gambia rivers separate. And the Portuguese build a settlement there. And the Portuguese begin to trade. They offer things for African gold, African salt, and cotton and copper. The Portuguese will give things like silk, iron weapons and tools, and alcohol to the tribal leaders. Alcohol is consumable and it can be addictive. So every time the African king wanted more, the Portuguese said, well, we need some more of that, some more of those, or some of that. And eventually the Portuguese are going to purchase slaves from Senegambia. About 1/3 of the slaves taken from Africa in the 1500s come out of Senegambia to go work in plantations. They had copied the plantation slavery of Mali, and they had moved it to the West Indies. Have you guys heard of banana republics? All right, small Caribbean nations that will grow bananas. Bananas are good, bananas taste good, they're high in protein, sugar cane, and other crops. What do those Malians do? Well, let's do that over here. Shortly thereafter, other Europeans begin to follow. The English and the Portuguese and the French will battle for areas around the Senegal and Gambia rivers. And so, we already talked about that. Because of the amount of slaves being pulled out, the slave trade is going to shift farther and farther southward. Early on, young African men were the prime targets for slavery to do all the heavy labor. Eventually, that will switch to young African women because women can have, Alex Parks? Babies. There we go. All right, and a baby slave is a slave you didn't have to buy. All right, so that's how it's going to shift. By the middle of the 1500s, the slave trade is bigger business than the gold trade, and it will begin to disrupt Africa. So we move down to Central Africa, like the stomach, especially the Kingdom of the Congo. And Central Africa runs from Atlantic to the Indian Ocean up to the Red Sea. It is where there is all types of geography, rainforest, grassland, mountain plateau, desert, all condensed in an area, one of the most beautiful areas of Africa. And there's a big giant river called the Congo River that runs in the shape of like a big crescent. And it has hundreds of thousands of smaller tributaries. Along all of those tributaries are little villages. And the Portuguese say, hey, in those little villages I can capture a bunch of slaves. I don't know how to say that in Portuguese. So anyway. For much of history, geographical barriers protected much of Africa from outside civilization. But the Portuguese are able to overcome this for two reasons. Number one, they sail up the river and make contact with kings or chiefs and say, hey, we'll give you fire, water, and some of this for some of your people. Or they will hire people along the coast to go deep into the interior and capture other Africans for them. Europeans were highly susceptible to malaria, so it was much easier to let someone go and do it for you. And so Congo is very wealthy. It has a lot of people, but the kings pretty much gave the Portuguese unlimited access for consumables like wine and olive oil and tobacco. Eventually, so many people from the Congo are captured, their king, King Afonso, says enough is enough. He had been educated by Portuguese missionaries. Another big reason to go into Africa is the quest to save souls. Whether you were a Catholic or a Protestant missionary, there's now a whole continent of people we can go after and get. And King Afonso was a Christian. And he was educated in Portuguese, and he implores the King of Portugal, royal to royal, hey man, you got to stop this. This is garbage. You cannot take my people. The King of Portugal says, yeah, but you can't see it from my house, so I don't really care. And the Portuguese try to assassinate King Afonso. That only makes the people of the Congo mad, and they are able to restrict slave catching to only one point called Point Noir, or Black Point in Africa. It's one of the few African slave forts that are still there. After a while, when King Afonso dies of natural causes, the Congo breaks apart in a series of wars known as the Yaga or the Jaga Wars. It was people who supported the Portuguese, or it is people who supported traditional Congan values. It will fragment and it will break apart the giant kingdom of the Congo. So, this takes us to East Africa. We're going to swing all the way around. And going back to the time of Egypt and the pharaohs, there were a few smaller kingdoms that Egypt interacted with. There was the kingdom of Nubia in what is today the northern Sudan. Alex, I need the map. All right, for a second. There's the kingdom of Nubia, right up in here in the Sudan, and then below them, from the Sudan, modern-day Eritrea, Djibouti, and Ethiopia, is the kingdom of Aksum. And the kingdom of Aksum will be a regional empire for a long time. Going back to 350, they become a Christian state. It's why Ethiopia is a Christian country today. And Nubia and Aksum are going to speak the other African language dialect known as Swahili. Can you speak any Swahili? Not even like Asante Sana or anything? Yeah. Chrysler's got skills. You didn't know that?
I went to Tanzania for a month.
Oh, you guys think I've been joking about Casa de Chrysler? You should see this place.
It's a German missionary house.
Yeah, a former German missionary house now owned by...
No.
Yeah.
No.
Don't let him be bashful. Don't fall for that, you know. Can you speak Swahili if you went back for a couple weeks?
Yeah. I could teach classes.
See? You guys think I make this stuff up. When are you going to be true believers? When will you come to the side of righteousness? I do not lie to you. God almighty.
I can't tell what's like a joke and what's not anymore. Every reality has been thrown out.
He's never been joking.
It's all been real.
It's all real.
All right, Ryan. Hi, how are you?
Oh. I know how to say Asante Sana and Creepy Sana. He's always right. I forget. Sorry.
It's all right. It's all right. Yes. Thank you and you're welcome.
Thank you very much. You have a house in Africa? Huh? You have a house in Africa?
No.
A German missionary house. Yes. Now, it is Swahili. Swahili is the second big language dialect. It is the root language of most of East and Central Africa. Bantu is the west coast and the center. It meets Swahili, which transitions over to the east coast. And so from Tanzania up to the bottom of Egypt is where Swahili is spoken. The ancient Nubian Empire, sometimes known as the Empire of the Kush, K-U-S-H. They were conquered and traded with the Egyptians way back during the New Kingdoms until the New Kingdom, like Ramses, Hatshepsut, King Tut, and those people. Do we need to do river valleys? Yes. Great. Okay. All right. Yes, we can. All right. Like Bob the Builder. All right. Egypt, Mesopotamia, China, India. I'll go over them more later.
If we just do like a brief thing.
All right. The kingdom of Axum took them over. And Axum will be movers and shakers in East Africa for a long time because they are right across the Red Sea from the Middle East. So there's a lot of trading going back and forth because of closeness and proximity. So there will be a little bit of trade going on since the dawn of time right here. Even though Axum is Christian, they get along well with Islamic society because they've always traded going back to ancient Egypt in the river valleys practically. So the Portuguese will eventually make it around the Cape of Good Hope, around South Africa. They'll say hi to Darshan, and they'll move up here, and they'll come over to this area. All right? All right? Dar al-Salam. What does that mean? Dar al-Islam, because this area had been heavily influenced by Islam. Again, due to its proximity, and I forgot to tell you yesterday, the Muslims created the dhow. Did I tell you the ship with the lateen sail? I told you that, didn't I? All right. So this area is under heavy Islamic influence until the Portuguese show up. And the Portuguese are pretty much going to destroy East African and Swahili civilization. They want to dominate the Islamic sea trade, so they simply just wage war and blow everything up. They blow up Islamic merchant ships. They blow up African port cities, all in a quest to take it over. And here's where the Portuguese are stupid. If you destroy it and you take it over, you're just going to have to rebuild it. So why in God's name destroy it? We don't know, but that was their tactic. So they will interrupt, have a good day, Lucy, international trade from Africa to the Middle East all the way to Indonesia. And simultaneous with Portuguese destruction, there was a long period of drought on the interior of Africa in the Sudan, sending many people this way. So as poor Africans come to the coast, Africans are coming in the middle, and East Africa is destroyed. It becomes a wasteland. This is the drought that Somalia and parts of Ethiopia are struggling with to this very day. So you see Black Hawk Down and movies like that, why Mogadishu is a wasteland and we have Somali pirates. It's the Portuguese and the drought 1-2 punch 500 years ago that caused it. In reality, that started it right there. Yes, sir.
Ethiopia was still able to like kind of hang on a little bit though?
Yes, yes, yeah. The Portuguese will leave behind a destabilizing force where some sailors stay behind, and they want to become rich landowners. They will marry into African tribes, and their descendants will be called Prozeros, half Portuguese, half African. But the Prozeros are outcasts, not only by the African tribes, but also by the Portuguese. They are not accepted anywhere. So they become kind of lawless little feudal warlords taking over East Africa with armed bands of thugs. So the Portuguese claim they were doing this for Christianity. They were trying to convert souls, when in reality the only thing they were doing was trying to acquire territory for economic gain. So what was once a very powerful, rich African and Islamic trading area was destroyed. What I think is funny is a lot of the tribes on the interior of Africa refused to trade with them. And the Portuguese try to stop shipping all along East Africa, and they simply can't. So this turns us to southeastern Africa. And the area we're going to talk about is partly Mozambique with the Zambezi River, and Zimbabwe and Botswana, the modern-day Limpopo River. It's a fabulous place until a dictator named Mugabe took it over, but that's a different story for a different day. Give me un moment. Apparently tea is supposed to be good for you. God, it tastes bad though. Just straight green tea, like, wow. My wife's like, it'll help you. I'm like, maybe it's an acquired taste. I don't know. Is it an acquired taste? Yeah.
Oh, well, that's the problem.
Like regular old English breakfast.
That's what she claims. I'm like, whatever.
And like green tea, and it actually does make you lose weight.
Wait, really?
Yeah.
Damn, I'm gonna get a whole like Sam's Club. Like, we can go get me a vat of that stuff. Just get a tap in the back. I'm gonna just heat that.
Using green tea, and he lost 10 pounds in like 3 months. Because my all he drink.
He also starved himself.
Did he eat anything?
No,
Well, yeah,
but like,
but like he was drinking green tea.
but he didn't like start exercising or anything. It was just.
It was my green tea. Just drunk.
Wait, you were raised?
Green tea?
Green tea?
Green tea.
Thank you.
They invented it in Zimbabwe in South Africa. Not really, but that's okay. Yeah. All right. Zimbabwe was the heart of a civilization that was far enough inland that they escaped the Portuguese. They were fairly isolated from not only the Portuguese but Islamic sea trade. It was a pure and solely African-only civilization. In around 800, a group of Bantu-speaking people made it into Zimbabwe. They were known as the Shona people. And that's about as far south as they get. And here they begin to build a vast civilization eerily reminiscent of the ancient Greek city-states. They built the civilization of the Great Zimbabwe, which they have stones that are stacked and interlocked without any mortar. In each of the cities, there is a large hill, an acropolis, that has temples built on it and a food granary surrounded by a defensive wall. Below them is the city-like urban area for artisans and merchants and another defensive wall. And outside of that were where the villagers and the farmers lived, the largest of which was a giant 60-acre acropolis known as the Great Zimbabwe. Now, this went on 400 to 600 years, or no, wait a minute. This went on 1,200 to 1,600 years after the Greek city-states fell to Rome. But they are almost mere images of each other. And there were 150 city-states of Zimbabwe. How many Greek city-states were there? 150, all right? So once again, people will do the same things around the world almost identically. People were agricultural, but they were also great artisans, working with gold and with copper, and they ran their own gold trade. We have found artifacts from East Africa, well, you know, they're in Southeastern Africa, from the Middle East, and as far away as China in the Great Zimbabwe. So somehow, some way, they had contact with outside people. They were a pure African civilization. Unfortunately, we don't know a lot about them or how their civilization fell, because as smart and thrifty as they were, they did not write anything. They had no writing system. This will bring us to South Africa. And in the 1600s, the Dutch are going to found Cape Town, where they can resupply and swoop around and get to East Africa or over to India. And it will be founded by the great Dutch East India Trading Company. It quickly becomes a colony as guys say, why get back on a ship and I can just stay here? And the Dutch initially traded with the local people known as Khoikhois. But they are very quickly displaced by the Dutch. Eventually, the British are going to want to gobble that up as they're tired of the Dutch. And the British East India Company moves in. And there is a series of wars between the Dutch and the British and a local population known as the Zulus by the great King Shaka Zulu. And even using traditional African weapons against rifles, the Zulus do a lot of damage. They will eventually lose, and the British and the Dutch will fight it out in a series of wars known as the Boer Wars, which the British win. But the Dutch and the English will leave behind a presence, sort of like the Portuguese Prozeros, known as an Afrikaner. And an Afrikaner will begin, the white minority will begin to subjugate the black majority of South Africa, and this will begin the apartheid movement. Shortly after this time, during the heyday of exploration and takeover, it leads to the era of imperialism, where King Leopold of Belgium went in and claimed the entire country of the Congo for himself. And other European countries said, no, I don't think so. And so this is when the Great Scramble is kicked off in the Berlin Conference, where Africa is carved up along European lines. When they are done, only the countries of Ethiopia and Liberia will be untouched by Europeans. Here is Liberia and there is Ethiopia. Everything else will be gobbled up.